Hello, welcome to Butterflies Prospering Wellness. This is our next video we're going to be doing. I am Crystal, one of the owner and therapists here.
Okay. And I'm Michael, the LPC, LCDC. I'm the therapist here for her.
All right, so Michael, go ahead and we'll get right into what we'll be discussing today.
So today's topic is going to be a little bit specialized. It's one of the things that I predominantly work on with the company, and that's specifically issues for individuals who are LGBTQ. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, so forth and so on, pansexual, asexual, whole gamut. So we're going to be covering we're going to basically be kind of like doing a bit of a buffet approach, similar to like last time, and like explaining some of like the topics that we would be like discussing if we were to do therapy for individuals who are LGBT, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about specific subtopics within those larger things. So the main 6 points that we're going to be touching on today are: one, dealing with internalized stigma; two, coming out and ways to come out; three, transgender issues; four, family issues and how family members can respond to an individual who is LGBT; five, dating and relationships for individuals who are LGBT; and lastly, safety. So the first topic is dealing with internalized stigma. Now, the thing to remember with this is that we'll call a spade a spade. In Western culture, there tends to it's a little bit better now than what it used to be, but there is a level of stigma against individuals who are of this particular community. It has historical precedents, and it's been around for many, many years. And a lot of it is also tied to little aspects of religion. And individuals will sometimes internalize this prerogative within themselves, and it will lead to a level of self-hate. For example, anecdotally, I've dealt with individuals who were female to trans man, who were still, they were starting the process, receiving hormones and such, and they were still struggling with the concept of, explaining to their child who they had, like, because, I don't want them to deal with this as well as all the problems of dealing, being an adolescent and such. And part of it was just, having her like, sit down, calm down, let's do some self-acceptance. And remember, your child loves you regardless. That internalized self-loathing that was jammed down this individual's throat from, conception. And they had taken that on. There was a level of self-loathing. So one of the big things we worked on was self-acceptance, self-esteem, and also the process of accepting yourself and who you are in this new change within your life. So after that, the next topic would be ways to come out. Now, as we all know, like, individuals, it used to be, back in the day, if somebody was LGBT, they would just, keep it under lock and key, really, really hard because, well, one, there was not just a lot of stigma, but there was also legal consequences. Oscar Wilde and such. And then there was also social ramifications. In some parts of the country, it was a very real thing. An individual could be killed and nobody would be held responsible. Just a few decades ago, that was, as common as sunrise and sunset. But nowadays, people are a bit more accepting. And one of the ways that a lot of LGBT individuals have to kind of like really like to self-accept and also to have others accept them and say, hey, this is me, is to quote unquote come out of the closet. usually to loved ones, friends, in some cases also work environments, so forth and so on. So some of the things that we talk about in ways to come out, there are a few subtopics in here. For example, when an individual comes out, whether they are uh, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, pansexual, so forth, is when you come out, be prepared for pushback. Remember, human beings are creatures of patterns. They are creatures of habit. We internalize things in the course of our mind, and we have a sense of permanence to it. This is how it's supposed to be, and everything has to follow this lockstep pattern because, well, beings think that way. We're creatures of habit. We're creatures of patterns. It's how we problem solve. It's why we have nuclear weapons and baseball caps. Joking aside, when individuals come out, that preconceived notion, particularly amongst parents, is very drastically challenged. So even amongst very accepting, very what would be considered socially liberal in this particular culture, there will be a level of surprise, a little bit of a level of confusion, and a little bit of, well, what do we do now? Now that Billy is starting hormones and going through surgery, and now it's going to be she, and she's going to be Teresa. We have a daughter now. I accept them, but what do I do? So forth and so on. So so when an individual comes out, be prepared for pushback. Also, don't argue. This goes for both parties. Um, when an individual comes out of the closet, when you if you start by being argumentative, or you respond to somebody attempting to bait you into a confrontation, you basically you basically run the risk of turning something that is a form of self-efficacy and liberation, and you turn it into a poop flinging contest. It becomes about, oh, I hate you because you did this and you did that. And you start bringing up stuff from the past. There's been situations where people have brought out, well, the reason you're that way is because your dad abused you, and then mom and dad start chewing each other out and so forth, and the kid's there who's been trying to come out, come out as, gay or such. And they're like, what do I do now? So the main thing is not to argue. Now, that being stated, there's no reason to accept abuse. If the parent or friend or somebody or whoever you're coming out to responds by, hurling insults or throwing hands, there's no reason to tolerate that nonsense. So basically the way to go about it is to have two people, two people, or possibly two, three, something like that, to deal with it as adults, very polite, and very respectful. So beyond that, there's also considering your environment. For example, you don't want to end up, coming out in a very public place, because then if things go awry, all of a sudden 911 gets called. Or, if, you're coming out to like your parents or something, and they're already having a stressful time because, grandma died and the house is about to be foreclosed upon by the bank and so forth and so on. That can add to the stressors that will affect the emotional reaction of the person you're coming out to. So just be mindful of this. Granted, coming out is very much about, you, but at the same time, you have to consider the environment when that happens. Also, a lot of people will sometimes, they'll need the security blanket. They'll have they'll bring their partner, their boyfriend, their girlfriend, so forth and so on. And they'll just thrust themselves out and be like, you know, we're a couple now, and so forth and so on, and you have to accept us both, and blah 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 blah. That's not a wise strategy. Here's why. When when a person comes out, it's a very emotionally trying time for the person who's used to dealing with it. So if it's a friend, and especially with a child and stuff, and then when you take that circumstance, and then you throw in, now I have to accept this new person who I don't even know, or who's or in the case of some people, who are a little bit homophobic or something, this person who's corrupted my child or corrupted my friend or something, it ends up creating a whole extra set of issues that takes away from the issue, from the topic at hand. So it's not always a good idea to come out with a partner or a second person or a third person. The most typically what's advocated according to research is maybe like 2, 3. Try to make it like a one-on-one type of situation. And lastly, if an individual comes out, it's best to do it in person. Sending emails, sending a picture, Instagram, things of that nature. Text message.
By the way,
Dear grandma. So forth and so on. Joking aside, though, it's not beneficial to do that. The reason why is it doesn't tend to, one, it does a disservice to the person who's coming out, because it removes the emotional liberation. 2, it prevents the person from the person who's being come out to accept or respond. And also 3, you also can't deal with it. Also gets harder to understand, because all of a sudden you can't interpret connotation and denotation. It's just it's what might be a text of like something that's supposed to be loving and supportive ends up coming across as sarcastic, and then you have a whole slew of issues to deal with. So it's better to do it one if you can, or one on 2 or 1 on 3 at the most, and in person. That's the best way to deal with it. So the third topic is transgender issues. Now, we also have a transgender support group that's available. I've worked with transgender folks before, and I've led several groups and therapy sessions for individuals who are going through this process. So when an individual is transitioning, like some of the topics that we would discuss would be body image. And a lot of this would predominantly focus on secondary sex characteristics. For example, socially, individuals who have more secondary sex characteristics of the gender that they are transitioning to tend to experience less social stigma, less social antagonism, and also less hyper critiquing from within the community. And they also tend to have higher self-esteem because nobody's nitpicking on them at the time. Other things can also be is coping with body image, is discussing how your body's going to how an individual who's transitioning is going to respond to hormones, or eventually, if the person so chooses, a surgery. For example, with hormones, for example, women to trans men tend to respond to hormones quicker. I believe the research has indicated that's due to the extra layer of fat that women have in their bodies, so it tends to absorb the hormones and they respond quicker. Also, age tends to occur. Tends to occur. Yeah, it does tend to occur. Age tends to affect hormones as well. For example, older individuals, it will take more time for the hormones to take effect. Also, the redistribution of fat and muscle within the person. For example, for women to men, they over time they will develop a higher muscle distribution in their shoulders and such. Simultaneously, they'll also their breast size will decrease and such. They respond, that's to be expected, but there's not exactly a manual out there for these things. I mean, there's stuff online. There's a few things that are available, but it's one thing to read something in a blog post, and it's another thing to actually talk to a counselor or somebody about that. And also addressing fear for the transgender individual. Fear of how your friends will respond to you, how your family will respond to you, how your workplace will respond to you. That is a very real thing, because a lot of times when an individual is going through the transition process, they have to, I think one of the APA guidelines that was put out is the person has to start living as a female, it's written for the prerogative of female, so like living as their assigned gender. So if somebody is male and they want to become a female, they have to start living as a female. If they are female and they want to become a male, then they have to start living as a male and such. And that can lead to some, conflict within the work environment, like dress codes and things of that nature. One has to be prepared for that. One also has to be prepared for some possible social stigma. Safety is a consideration as well, when dealing with these type of circumstances. So those are some examples of some transgender issues we could talk about. Fourth, family members. How those individuals. So we could talk about, like, if for a person who had a child or nephew or in some cases a spouse come out as LGBT. Some topics we could discuss in terms of therapy would be learning to be supportive of that person. The grief of dealing with your conceived notion of this person being challenged. This is true not just like, especially within the immediate family circle of, like, when a child or someone comes out as LGBT, but it's definitely true when a spouse comes out. So you go through, like, the loss of that relationship, and you go through a grieving process as this person who you've known for many years is now, it's somebody else. And now you have to respond to that. Here's a curveball, try swinging at that one. So another issue is educating yourself on the issues that person is going to deal with. If the individual wants to be, like, supportive and stuff, learning about the particulars of the particulars of the LGBT culture and the various subcultures within it. Also, seeking support. There are groups that are available. I know within the transgender community for parents whose children are transitioning and such. There are also support groups that are available for the parents of children who are gay, lesbian, so forth and so on, non-binary, so forth and so on. And also, there's the use of pronouns can be utilized as a gesture of support to show that you're on that person's side. So along with...
Sorry, I was going to say definitely with the support.
She writes my paycheck, so she gets to interrupt whenever.
Moving forward. Whether, we agree or, disagree with, that person's decision,
Hmm.
looking at as a whole, them as a human being, as
Hmm.
accepting, okay, this is your choice. This is not about my choice,
Hmm.
so how can I be supportive and your choice, if it's not going to be, I always say, harming
Hmm.
to, others or someone themselves,
Hmm.
individually, because if
Hmm.
they feel like they're not being their best self or who they really are,
Hmm.
that could be an issue.
Hmm.
So definitely, the support groups encouraging loving yourself. And that's how I look at it, with we'll talk about shortly the relationships, having a healthy relationship when you are, maybe you used to be this person and now you're
Hmm.
someone else. So we'll get into the safety and then we'll talk about that as well.
Okay. So the fifth consideration is safety. And a lot of this is mainly taken from the old Ranger manual that the Army puts out. Joking aside, though, but there actually is a lot of carryover. For example, like when individuals are LGBT, because of the level of social stigma that is currently attached to it, you have to be mindful of certain things. For example, knowing your area's crime statistics, particularly against individuals who are LGBT, or, well, also an even higher risk, LGBT who is also a racial or ethnic minority. Um, I know for the past, well, at least the 5, I think possibly even 10 years, there has been a significant increase in the amount of physical assaults against members of the LGBTQ community, and there's been even more against minority members of the LGBT community. Also, along with knowing the crime statistics of your local area, there's knowing the police force. Are they friendly? Are they open minded? Are they on your side? Are they objective, or is there some weirdness going on? We all remember the old tales from I believe it was New York. New York is when the LGBT movement actually started, where police were actually harassing gay men in the 70s, and the 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 pushback against them ended up launching the whole movement. So, and then there are other situations where the police are very friendly, very supportive. They're not going to tolerate KKK rallies in their community because of things like that. So just know the police force as well. Other examples, interacting with the natives. Interact with the members of your community. It's very easy for people to be prejudiced against the distant other, who dares, who they see on the news and is going to take away whatever their freedoms of fill in the blanks, so forth and so on. But if they actually see somebody within the community who is LGBT, who's talking to them, who's nice to them, who lets them borrow their hose to water their garden, and cleans up the dog poop or in the yard or so
Dog
forth.
poop.
Yeah. Battling prejudice by picking up dog poop. Butterflies prospering wellness.
Scratch.
Joking aside, though, but it's one thing to be prejudiced against a distant other, but it's another thing to be prejudiced against somebody in your community who you have an individual relationship with. So it's a good way to build tolerance and acceptance. Other examples are if you go out, and this is just hedging your bets, traveling in groups, making sure that you're safe. It's one thing to attack for a person to attack a lone, isolated individual, but it's one thing to attack 3, 4, sometimes 5 people at the same time who are all looking out for each other at the same time, all looking out for each other. And lastly, never assume that your safety is guaranteed. Even in the most accepting communities, I know here in Texas, Austin, for example, would be a very supportive community of the LGBT groups. but you can never 110% count on that, because you never know. You may have one of these isolated lone wolf guys out there, and you have to always err on the side of caution. Now, with dating safety for members of the LGBT community, some examples that we could talk about are like meeting individuals in an open area and introducing them to people. For example, if you go to a particular restaurant and they know you, introduce your date to the manager, the waiter, whatever, who knows you, because that way, in case that person attacks you, or this is a setup so they can commit some type of hate crime, they got the identifying markers. And also, if people know where you are, they can come and help you or do something of that nature. Also, don't bring when you're on a date, don't bring excess stuff. Reason why is if you need to bolt out of there, if you need to bug out, as they say in doomsday prepper culture. Yeah. If you have extra stuff, that will get in your way. So, pack light. If you're a member of the LGBT community and you're on a date and you don't really know the person that well, because you never know what might happen. It might be a setup. Always err on the side of caution. And lastly, dating and relationships for same-sex couples and members of the LGBT community. And we'll let Crystal jump in on that.
Well, not as probably thorough as Michael here, but definitely I look at the individual relationship as a whole. Is it a healthy relationship? An approach that I'm taking, being objectively, your safety, there's no kind of toxicity in the relationship. So that is kind of similar with heterosexual relationships and the same sex. So really just, airing out, being able to describe your emotion, being able to express yourself and encouraging that positive self-love. So I always say, as therapists, our job is to be objective and not to project what we feel or what we think, and to educate, what is the safety, what is the healthy way to go about, being who you are, coming out, or, living the same sex, or dating someone of that same sex. So a lot of it, like we talked about before in other videos are similar. The open communication, the trust, cooperation, the support, supporting each other's decision. As long as it's, you always say, not harmful to anyone else, that's going to be, the best thing, indicator. So I won't hash out all of the stuff, but the trust, do you have trust in your relationship, and not getting to that jealousy part of, oh, you used to like this person or this type of person, now you're not, but being secure with yourself, and just encouraging that, the self-love and knowing who you are as an individual. So I know Michael covered a lot. We covered a lot of different topics. This is by no means a therapy session. Please seek professional help from your local therapist. And this is a guide, to, get you thinking and give you tips to encourage you, and informational. I will say educate. So again, we want to encourage you to check out our other videos. We have different topics that we talk about, real issues that are going on in the community, and we want to educate others. So again, this is not a form of therapy, but if you do need to find a therapist, look in your local community. Okay, and we thank you for joining us and checking us out during this time.
Take care.
Thanks.